Not yet.
Good morning, everybody.
Yeah, I think so. Oh,
Hi. Well, look at you guys already having a chat. Well done. Everybody can hear me okay? Can I get a thumbs up or a wave or whatever emoji you feel like sharing with us this morning, depending on your mood? Excellent. Thank you. Okay, cool. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your days to come to this session. We've got people joining on Facebook Live and people joining on Teams, and I think there are a couple of people joining on the Zoom link as well. So we have a full contingent. There are 222 people registered for this event, which goes to show that there is a little bit of a need for more help in this space. And it's not a surprise. It's just one of those ongoing challenges that as pressures rise and as people want more out of their workplaces but are struggling more and more with things outside of their workplaces, incivility becomes more rampant, and us as managers just are always in this awkward, difficult, hard place of just not having any options and feeling trapped between the tragedy of legalities and what am I allowed to do, and am I going to get in trouble for doing this, and is this going to be a nightmare, and particularly for teams that don't have HR support that can walk you through it and can tell you what you can and can't say. Most of the rest of us are out there floundering, and that's why I'm here, to try to help with some of that stuff, some of the real world. How do we actually do this in the real life and in real time, and call people on some of that stuff that we know is bad for our clinics, we know is bad for our culture, but it's sort of that simmering, not quite like, well, they didn't do anything wrong, they didn't swear at anybody, because obviously that you could just straight out performance manage. If they were straight out bullying somebody, you could straight out put in a grievance and do an investigation. If they straight out were being unprofessional, you know how to manage those things. It's the stuff that's like somewhere in the middle, right, where we know that it's across a line but it's not quite illegal enough that we know, okay, yes, I can call them on that, or yes, I can performance manage that. And I know I certainly have been in the position where I have tried to call somebody on their behaviors, and it's been a very new thing in that organization, and they've turned around and said, well, you can't manage me on my personality. They were in for a rude awakening. They realized, in fact, I could manage them on their behaviors. So those are the things that we're talking about here. The stuff that's not like outright wrong, I'm going to performance manage you straight away because that was unprofessional. And it's not good for your culture, but it's kind of that simmering yuckness. So one of the most common ways that people refer to that is incivility. Incivility being this kind of broad coverall term for stuff that just detracts from the vibe in the room. So the most common forms of it, you're going to get your passive aggressiveness, you're going to get your eye rolling, you're going to get your I suppose, or you get the gossip, or you get the things where they agree to stuff in the meeting and then they have a meeting after the meeting about the meeting and they have an opinion that they didn't feel like sharing in front of everybody, but now they're all whinging about it. It's that kind of underlying stuff. Does that all sound like the sort of thing that people are here for? Do you feel like you're in the right place? Give me a wave or a thumbs up or a, yes, I'm pitching to the right audience. You want to hear this stuff. Okay, cool. That's good to know. One other thing I did want to just ask, just so that I know that I'm pitching at the right level and that when we go through this, I'm covering kind of all bases. Would you mind just popping in the chat for me your role? You don't have to be like, I am the assistant director of whatever, but are you manager? Are you owner? Are you vet and colleague? A nurse? Are you HR? Just kind of so that I get a vibe of what sort of balance we've got here, and I make sure that I cover everybody as much as is possible. Okay, cool. So clinical director, practice manager, nursing team lead. That's a big team, Nicole. Yep, manager, shift lead, vet lead. Okay, cool. So we've got a good mix. That's good. All right. And so one of the things that we're going to find is that some of you are going to be in quite different positions to call this out in real time. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about like the real time on the ground. I am the head nurse and I am there in the room when it happens because, it happens at rounds or it happens during the day. Whereas other people we've got here is, the people in culture who maybe aren't in the room here and now but know these things are happening and you're getting this kind of feedback, that sort of stuff. So we're also going to do a little session on, well, what do we do to sort of proactively address it on a bigger level? So clearly I can't cover all of those things in really great detail in an hour, but I want everybody in every role to be able to walk away with something and some useful tool that you can put into effect right away. Does that make sense? Now, Chelsea, is that a hand up or is that a little wave you've got going on for me there? You're very welcome to pop hands up if you've got questions as we go, or save them for the chat section at the end, or pop them in the chat, or as Chelsea's done, feel free to chuck your hand up. I feel like I can hear you that you are talking, Chelsea, but hang on, it's very, very quiet my end. Try again. Press the wrong button. That's cool. I do that all the time. The waving thing and the raise your hand thing are very similar. All right, so cracking in. Hopefully, this is why you're all here. Why bother? I feel like you're already here, so you kind of know why to bother, but we'll spend 30 seconds doing it anyway, just because good all-rounder. What do we actually need before we step into this space? When are we going to do it? How are we actually going to do it? Which clearly is the big chunk of the session. And an invite at the end that if you need any help, you know where I am. Okay, that's kind of obvious. Who am I? Do I have a clue what I'm talking about? Probably not. Most of the time I'm bluffing, but on this particular space, this is my jam. All right. So I am a 2008 Murdoch grad veterinarian, but spent almost all of my career in leadership roles because turns out I'm actually more interested in people than I was in animals, which I know is anti-vet stereotype. But most specifically, I spent a lot of that time in animal welfare and animal sheltering, where we often don't have high-level HR support. We often are just sort of making do by the skin of our teeth. And I had to make so much of it up as I went because we didn't have the big corporate support. We didn't have the here's what you can and can't do, but also just like in every vet clinic, emotionally draining, emotionally charged pressure cooker environments of people not always being their best selves to the people at work, always bringing their best selves to the animals at work, and using up all of their energy, not on the people. So that was where I spent most of the first sort of decade of my career. I then ended up being what I refer to as performance punished, in that one of my early leadership roles, I had a really toxic culture that I needed to take on. And really, that kind of toxic culture that is beyond incivility, where people were actively making people cry every single day, where people were telling other people that, well, you just enjoy killing animals. And it was just this absolute quagmire of awfulness. And I went in there, all of 27, 28 years old, totally overwhelmed. But we set about this sort of program of turning it around, and it turns out it worked really well. And so then they sent me to be the CEO up in Darwin to do something quite similar. And then from there, I became what I would call typecast, is that I became headhunted for people who had cultures that weren't working and that needed a transformation. And so that's how I've ended up in quite a few of my roles, everything from manager of wildlife health at Taronga Zoo, which, yes, was as cool as it sounds as a job. I've been the general manager of a major veterinary specialist centre with 100-odd staff. I've been CEO of RSPCA's, executive managers of other ones, all sorts of things. I now run a consulting business where actually my primary remit is to keep veterinary professionals in the veterinary profession. And I do that by trying to get the leaders and the teams to talk to one another. So we do resilience for animal care teams, so mainly shelters and vet clinics, but then we also do leadership and culture for those leaders. But the really important part that I won't do them separately. If I'm going to work with your team on resilience and well-being and thriving and fulfillment, then I need to work with the leaders on how to not require them to be quite so resilient and how to have an organization where they're more likely to thrive and feel fulfilled. So that's kind of what I do now. And that is why I'm here. I'm also mum to this old man here who woke up this morning ataxic and is making me very anxious, and mum to this similarly ataxic, but just because she's crazy, chaos here. And that's kind of me. Hello. Did I just hear it? Was that somebody on purpose talking, or was that somebody telling their kids off behind them like I usually am? No? Okay. All right. That's all you need to know about me. Let's get cracked in. So the whys. Why are we going to tackle this stuff? I feel like you know it because you've already come. People need to feel psychologically safe. All right. And this is number one. If you don't call people out on this stuff, the people around you assume that it is accepted behavior, because the behavior you walk past is the behavior you accept. So if you are in the room when somebody does this passive aggressive, when they roll their eyes, when they're snarky or snappy, or you know that gossip is happening and you don't act, the most important thing here is that says something to the rest of your team. And it says that you're okay with it. Even if you are behind closed doors trying to performance manage that person, that is not what the rest of the team sees. They see you normalize that behavior because you didn't call it out right there and then. And this is where it gets tricky, because we've got a line, right? We've got the, oh, but I have to protect the psychological safety of the person that's doing it, and I need to protect the rest of the team. And that is the tricky line. We will talk about that in a second. We want to build trust and respect. We want people to know that you've got their back. So if they're being snapped at, if they're the junior vet who's having a senior nurse or a senior vet kind of make these passive aggressive comments, didn't you learn that at uni, or that sort of stuff, they need to know that you are somebody who will keep them safe. All right. And really importantly, the last one about role modeling, we want the whole team to eventually get good at calling people out on crappy behaviors. All right. And I do a program on active bystander training. And active bystanders basically just means, it's a term coined from people who watch car accidents or watch, domestic violence playing out in the street, or you're at if you're still of this age, you're at a concert and you watch some guy grab some girl's bum in the mosh pit. And, can you be somebody who has no official power, but still takes action to protect the people around you whilst keeping yourself safe? And we want our whole team to feel confident to be an active bystander. And that is where we want to get. We want to give them the tools. We want to give them the right words, the right scripts, but also we want to give them the confidence. And that means you've got to do it first. All of you guys out there, the practice managers, the senior vets, the lead vets, the HR teams, definitely, you've got to do this first before your team is ever going to trust that you get somebody in to train them on how to be an active bystander and you're not an active bystander, you got no chance. So it's really absolutely vital that if you want your team to be calling people on gossiping when you're not in the room, you have to do it when you are. All right. But most of that's common sense, right? I don't need to, that's sort of teaching granny to suck eggs. So cracking into what you're actually here for. The myths, okay, it'll sort itself out. It won't. Culture left unattended spirals downwards, not upwards. All right. If you have these behaviors, if you've got, to stereotype, an old codger senior surgeon who's, being condescending to the young ones, or you've got, an old grumpy nurse who's going through some personal challenges and she's bringing that with her to work and she's bringing everybody else down with negativity or gossip, or always having a go at the decisions that are made. Those things don't sort themselves out. Okay, that person becomes a little flint in your otherwise nice or neutral culture, and it spirals from there. Personality versus performance. Okay, yes, particularly when we've got people with neurodivergences, we do need to be able to differentiate between what is normal for them and what feels natural for them, and not forcing people to behave in a way that is not authentic to themselves. Okay, But there is still a line where your behavior impacting others still can be called out. All right. So even when we've got people that are, oh, well, it's just my personality, I'm just like that. Or, or all of the things that are associated with diversity and people not understanding each other, whether it's cultural, whether it's neurodiverse, whether it's any other type of diversity, blokes versus females, gender and generational changes, it actually doesn't matter whether it feels okay for the person who said it. Okay. It has to feel okay for the people witnessing it. Intent doesn't actually matter when it comes to things in the workplace. How it lands does. So whether it's their personality or not, it's still a performance issue if it's impacting other people negatively. Okay. The myth that it'll be uncomfortable is actually true. That's not so much a myth. But the question that I want you to ask yourself, is it more uncomfortable to do it or more uncomfortable to not do it? Because right now, yeah, it is awkward. You have to have some balls. You have to count down to 3 and just say something out loud. And the first few times you do it, you're going to get pushed back and it's going to feel uncomfortable and it's going to feel yuck. But I want you to compare that to how it's feeling when it keeps going on and when it's getting worse and worse and that behavior becomes normalized. All right. And then the last one, it's not my place. Now, most of the people in that chat there mentioned that you are some sort of senior colleague or a lead or a manager or a supervisor. But even if you're not, remember the comment about active bystanders? This should be everyone's place to feel comfortable and confident to do this. So even if you're just here today as a concerned colleague, you do have the right to say these things. And I'll hopefully show you how to do that in a pretty low conflict way that is perfectly appropriate for a colleague as well as a manager. Yeah. All right. So what do we need before we do it? The first thing you need is clarity. What are you actually trying to achieve? The biggest mistake a lot of people make when it comes to culture is they're like, oh, well, we want a nice culture. What even is that? Okay, everyone wants a nice culture. Everybody wants positive culture. But if we don't really understand what it is we're trying to achieve and why we're trying to achieve it, and whether that's the psych safety piece, whether that is around having a more constructive team or a more harmonious team, or, sometimes it's as simple as, I don't care if you do it not on the reception desk where customers can see you. Like, you've got to decide what you're actually putting your foot down. But importantly, and this is the last step that we talk about last today, are your team on the same page about that? Because if you have a problem with gossip and they don't, you still don't have clarity. If you think that eye rolling is unacceptable and they don't, it's really hard to call people out. Well, I mean, we're still calling people out. That's how we set these expectations. But it's really hard to hold the line and feel comfortable and feel confident and know that you've got everyone's back and they've got your back in the calling out if it isn't clear across the organization what is and isn't an acceptable behavior. And that comes back to, well, what if it's just my personality? We need to agree as a team, well, what's your personality and what's not? Or what's okay versus what's impacting others, even if you feel comfortable doing it. You've got to have the courage to do it. All right. This is where balls come in. All right. The countdown is one of the most effective tools I can give you for this because there is no way to get better at it except practice. The only way you ever feel more comfortable is doing it over and over again because the only way out is through. But whilst you're in that stage of this feels incredibly awkward, one of the most effective tools I found when I was first learning how to call people out in public was the 3-2-1, which is you count down from 3 and just say something. Okay. The 3-2-1 is literally just because you're going to chicken out. All right. And a lot of us do. And I promise you, even though you're chickening out thinking, oh, now's not the right moment, or I'll talk to them later, something like 76% of things that you don't call out in the moment don't get called out. All right. Our ability to follow through just because we get busy, just because they get busy, just because, suddenly the day's gone and then it's too late and then it feels weird to call them on it 3 days later when you're both back on the same shift again. If you don't call them out right here and now, 0.75% chance you'll never call them out on it. All right. So just say something. nothing. All of everything I'm going to tell you about, words to use and stuff, it doesn't really matter that much. The way that I'm giving it to you is sort of designed to be as low conflict as possible, but it doesn't actually matter. Saying something is what matters. All right. So the communication piece is what's coming up. But last but not least, out of the 4 C's, I do just want you to do one tiny, tiny check in your head before you say something. And is this the most right thing to do? Or at the very least, is this the least wrong thing to do? Because this is where we're trying to get to that question of, is it more awkward to say something or more awkward to not something? Which is going to do the most harm? And so the biggest question I want you to ask yourself is that staff member worth more than however many staff members right now are in this room and watched that happen and watched you do nothing? Because poor behaviors tolerated on an ongoing basis, that loses you staff. And you know who you'll get to keep? The ones with poor behaviors. All right. So what I want you to really, really be clear on is how many people is this person worth to you? Even if they are your most experienced senior surgeon, even if they are that nurse that can handle all of the fractious cats, I want you to really ask yourself, even if they're your director, how many others of your staff are they worth? So when we ask about compassion, it's about, are we being compassionate to the individual? And that means we approach them with respect and we treat them with respect, even when we're calling them out. But we can be compassionate to everybody as well. So even if you have to do something that is mean to one person, you have to look at that on balance of compassion for your team. Yeah. All right. When are we going to do it? Yes, you can do it in real time. This is a big question that everybody asks me. Oh, but, can I call them out in front of other people? Isn't the golden rule you're supposed to do that in public? In private. The answer is, as we've already discussed, if you wait until you're in private, A, you probably won't. All right. Follow up almost never happens because you get busy and they get busy. B, no one else knows that you called them out because you can't say it because then it's confidential, and they probably won't say it because they're either embarrassed or they'll come down giving a version of the story that doesn't really reflect what just happened. So the big underlying question that everybody wants to know, can I call them out in public? Yes, you can. Okay. As long as you are respectful, you are objective, and you are consistent. If you consistently call out one person on their crappy behaviors and someone else is allowed to get away with crappy behaviors, now you could be potentially accused of bullying. Okay. Consistency is not only what sets up that clarity for everybody that this is what we expect as an organization, but also it's one of your ass coverings for, no, I did not bully that person. No, I did not victimize that person. This is a team-wide approach, and I call everybody on behaviors that undermine our team. All right. So when you do get your first bullying complaint, because if you do have fairly toxic cultures, and this is a very large issue for you, it is a possibility. The people who have never been managed on this stuff before, they don't take it well the first few times, and it does come a bit of a shock, and we have to be prepared for that reality. But if you know that you are treating them with respect, and that's where some of the tools I'm about to cover do, and if you know that you are doing it to everybody, okay, then they haven't got an argument for you treating them like crap. All right. However, once you've called them out in front of somebody, sometimes it's okay to just call them out. All right. Just, hey, that didn't land right. Are you sure that's how you meant it? Would you like to reframe? Sometimes that's all you need to do. If it's a first thing, if that person's not particularly prone to things, if it just came out first time, just let it go. All right. You called them out. They know that you didn't tolerate it. Everybody else saw that you didn't tolerate it. That's all you need to do. But like any performance issue, if that happens again, then we need to do a follow-up. Okay. And I want to touch on the end, the how we agree what that follow-up and what that step for, first strike, second strike, third strike is. Okay. Because that's where we get to warnings and PIPs and things like that. But I want to talk to you a little bit about how to engage the team in that. So I won't go too far into it. So the how. What are we actually going to do? Real time, you're in a room, you're having a meeting, somebody snaps at somebody else, talks over somebody else, rolls their eyes, goes, oh, fine. All right. That sort of stuff. We've got 3 steps. We acknowledge it, which basically means we name it. All right. We call, what did you just do? Or at least, how did I interpret what you just did? All right. We anchor it. That means we bring it back to something that we've all agreed or that society agrees. We have a reason why that didn't land right. Okay, that didn't land right because that's not really in line with our agreements of how we talk to each other, or you all know that our policy says that we don't gossip, or that might make other people feel like crap. Whatever it is that makes it clear, I saw this behavior. That behavior doesn't feel right for this reason. And then we ask, okay? And the ask is usually something that opens it up for them to save face, okay? So it might be, would you like to reframe? Or did you mean it to sound that way? Or are you okay? All right. So the ask is the part that puts it back on them to A, take accountability, hopefully, if things are going really well for you. But the first few times, don't worry, they won't. But B, allows them that opportunity to save their face, because a lot of people will just be like, oh, no, I didn't mean it that way. All right. And that's okay. You can drop it then because you've called it and they've gone, she's going to call me on that. I'm not going to get away with that. And everyone else around you. Have you ever been in that situation where somebody tells a really sexist joke and everybody's really awkward about it? And that one person who's got balls turns around and says, I don't get it. Can you explain that? And then everybody knows that the joke is dead. And nobody is ever telling a sexist joke in front of that person ever again. It's kind of like that. It doesn't actually matter what their response is at the time. What matters is that you called it. Okay. And we will touch on what happens if it escalates and gets a little bit worse. But acknowledge, anchor, ask, which basically just means name what you saw, why it didn't land right. What are you going to do about it? Okay, so here's some scripts. All right, this is the slide that you might want to screenshot if you're that way inclined. Okay, these are just some ideas. You have to make sure that these things feel authentic coming out of your mouth. These are things that feel authentic coming out of my mouth, but you have to practice them until you can kind of, does that feel like you, right? But on the face of it, we're trying to acknowledge. So name what you're seeing. No judgment, no like harshness, just a neutral, this is what I saw. We anchor it, which is we tie back to why we didn't feel like that was okay. And then we ask, do you want to save face now? Or do you want to take ownership of the fact that that wasn't cool? So let's say I just noticed an eye roll just now when Sarah was speaking. What matters here is how we show up for one another, even when we're under pressure. Can we rewind and try that again? I'm going to leave that slide there for a second because I'm just going to give you the chance to have a read, get a feel for how they land with you. Do you see some of them, particularly in the naming it phase and the acknowledge, okay, we do need to just be a tiny bit careful sometimes. If you say like, you know, your tone was angry, it's really easy for them to be like, no, it wasn't. So this is where sometimes the acknowledge part has to come with a I felt or an I heard or I interpreted or your tone suggests, okay? So being a tiny bit careful that if you call it out really as if you're in their head and you know what they were thinking and that you've already decided that that's what they meant, you can get yourself into a little sticky situation because then it's you versus them on what they meant or whether they did or didn't say it in a grumpy tone. And you don't want to start that argy-bargy here. I'll tell you in a second about how we follow that up if you do have different interpretations of their tone. But this is where it can be really useful to not necessarily start with, you did this, okay? You can if it was something objective, something like an eye roll or a crossed arms or a walking out of the room. That stuff's that happened, right? You either did or you didn't. But most of the stuff that we tend to get in this space is kind of subtle and or subjective, all right? Whether or not their tone was appropriate or whether or not their body language was appropriate or whether or not you know, they said something sarcastically. And this is where it's quite helpful to use words like that tone sounded sarcastic, or that felt uncomfortable for me. Those sorts of things that really kind of call them on it, but you're not putting yourself in their head and assuming. Because remember, at the end, what we want to do is ask. And sometimes the best ask question is, did you mean it that way? And if you've already said you were sarcastic, and now you're asking them if they were sarcastic. So that sounded sarcastic. Did you mean it that way? Is quite a different conversation. Does that make sense? But remember what I said as well. This is all scripts and this is helpful. And these are just low conflict steps that you can follow that gives you a safe, compassionate, and low conflict way of just naming something and calling people out. But remember that if you forget all of these words, all you need to do is say something. And the easiest thing I found to say when my head is all over the place and I'm on the spot and I'm a bit blah is just, that sounded sarcastic. That sounded like you didn't really mean it. That sounded like you're frustrated. That sounded like you disagree. Did you mean it that way? All right. So even if you skip the anchor step, all right, just that sounded like X. Do you want another chance? Do you want to try that again? Is kind of what you're saying. So if you forget everything else, if you can't do acknowledge, anchor, ask, all right, whilst you're still learning and you're still getting your courage up at this stuff, that sounded something. Did you mean it to? Yeah? Okay. So what happens when they come back and go like, no, it didn't. No, I didn't. And particularly if you're now doing a follow-up afterwards. So you've called them out in the moment, all right? And then you've gone and kind of gone, hey, this has happened a couple of times. Can we have a quick chat about it? And then they start doing things like, oh no, well, that's just my voice. Or, oh no, my body language is always like that. Or I don't know what you mean about my body language. The biggest mistake, I guess, if I want to be that blunt about it, one of the biggest challenges that a lot of leaders find is that they feel the need to win a conversation. They need to show the other person that I am right about your behavior, or I am right about my expectations. And if you are in a senior enough position where you actually are, you do get to decide that stuff. That's cool. Okay. But most of the time, it's actually not that helpful for the conversation, because you just get into this, did she, didn't she? Is it okay? Is it not okay? And you end up sort of having to defend or justify or explain your position or your expectations. One of the most important leadership pieces of advice I could possibly give you, whether it applies to this particular scenario or any, is that you do not have to win a conversation. You only have to hold the line. You don't have to convince them that their tone was inappropriate. You only have to convince them that your expectation is that their tone changes. Can you see the difference? Because if they don't believe you, oh no, well, that's just how I talk, or no, it's fine to do an eye roll, or, you know, I didn't mean it that way, or she's fine with me having a joke at her expense, or we were all comfortable with the gossip. You don't actually have to justify why you're not comfortable with the gossip. All you have to do is be clear. My expectation is that we don't gossip. You do not have to win. You only have to hold the line. And in my experience, one of the most common deflections that we get when we try to call people, sometimes they do it in real life, but sometimes they're a bit too taken aback to do it in real life. So usually this is when you try to follow up or call them on it after a few episodes, you get the deflection of all of the reasons why they did it. Or, you know, oh, well, that's because she was mean to me first. Oh, well, that's just because, you know, you never listen. Or that's just because the policy's wrong. Or that's just because we were overworked and you don't have enough staff on. Now, the really important thing here is they are trying, probably subconsciously, they don't even know they're doing it. They're feeling uncomfortable and they're just trying to make the uncomfortable feeling go away. And the most simple way to make an uncomfortable feeling go away is turn it back on you. And then you have to be uncomfortable. And so then I feel better because now I am in a position, I am the attacker, not the defender, if that makes sense. All right. We don't really want to get into attack defend conversations. But when people are feeling like you're telling them off for something, the quickest, surefire way to make that discomfort go away is to turn it around on you. All right. Now, we want to protect their psych safety, right? So we don't want to be like, I don't want to talk about the crap policy, or I don't want to talk about the fact that you're overworked, or I don't want to talk about the fact that you've got something going on at home, because that's sort of not listening to them, right? But that doesn't mean you need to allow this conversation to be derailed. And this is where holding the line comes in. This is where you can go, I'm sorry you're going through so much at home. I really want to hear more about that. Can you book some time with me in first thing tomorrow? And I want to see how I can support you. But this conversation is about X. And then they will try to deflect with something else about, well, it's because we're overworked. And you go, oh, that sounds really hard for you. I'd really love for you to book some time in with me to talk about that. Right now, we're doing X. Okay, so I do want you to acknowledge what they're saying and validate that sounds hard, or I hear you, but I'm still holding this line. All right. And this is where the holding the line versus the winning comes in. Because if you're feeling like you still need to win and they're saying, well, they were snappy because they're overworked because you haven't recruited a new nurse yet, then you feel like you have to defend that. You have to explain why you haven't got a new nurse yet. You have to, and then the whole conversation's off track and derailed, and then they leave. You kind of all leave feeling a bit crappy, right? Nobody really achieved anything. So I want you to start listening for and noticing the deflection. All right. They're getting uncomfortable and they will try to deflect in some way or another. It'll be your fault. It'll be someone else's fault. It'll be something at home's fault. It'll be something the other person didn't do. But they will try to find the reasons and the excuses and the deflections. And you can be sympathetic to those. You can still create an environment where you care about their concerns, but not right here now in this meeting. All right. So that is one of the most powerful lines I can give you in this whole thing, in any leadership thing, really. I care about what you're saying. Please arrange a time to speak to me about that because I want to hear more. But that is not what we're talking about today. Yeah. This is true for any sort of performance management. If anybody's ever sat and gone and thinking that they were going to finally get this conversation that you've been meaning to have for months and months about anything, and then you kind of come out of it going, why did we just spend the whole time talking about our policies? What? You do not have to win. You just have to hold the line. Yeah? Okay. Last but not least, I do want to just give you a little bit of how do we proactively change some of this, all right? Because if you just go in there and you've already got pretty high level, impressive levels of incivility, you're going to be doing a lot of this, okay? And you're going to be getting a lot of pushback. You're going to get a lot of people who are like, oh, no, I don't know, do I agree with that? Do I not agree with that? So if this is something that matters to you and you're trying to do a bit of a transformation on, I would encourage you to actually get buy-in from the beginning from the team and encourage them to decide how you should deal with it if somebody is incivil. And what that means is, I've got the picture of the IKEA furniture up there because people buy into the things that they built. If you built it and you come in and say, I don't think these behaviors are appropriate, they might disagree with you inwardly or outwardly, or just they might kind of agree with you when it applies to somebody else, but definitely not agree with you when it applies to them. That's the most common one. Everybody wants things to change, but they don't want to have to change them. So the first step, if you've got a really major kind of issue with some of this stuff, is to actually sit down at a team meeting. And you don't have to make it like a big thing. You don't have to have a specific, you can just have 20 minutes on an agenda, all right? And I want you to ask them, what do they think makes a good culture? How do we talk to each other in a way that makes us feel good? What things make us feel bad? What counts as a poor behavior? And yes, they will, even if they are somebody who eye rolls all the time, I guarantee to you they will say eye roll. It's usually the people who are the biggest culprits of it that have a problem with other people doing it, right? So I want you to ask them, what are poor behaviors? How do they make you feel? All right. And you're going to get them saying, The eye rolls make them feel condescended to, and snappiness makes them feel like they have to walk on eggshells, and gossip makes them feel like people are talking about them behind their back. All right. So you want them to say those things out loud. You want them to say it, not you. You just ask really good questions to get them to say it out loud. All right. And then you go, okay, it sounds like we all agree that these behaviors, list them if you can, make us detract from how we enjoy our jobs. So do we all agree that something needs to be done when these things happen? They will all agree, because anybody who doesn't agree looks like a twat at this point. And now you ask them, okay, how would you like me to manage that? What would you like me to do the first time somebody does it? Most people are going to say something nice like, oh, we should probably check if they're okay, which is great. If somebody does this for the first time, yeah, that should be your first response. Oh, that's not like you. Is everything all right? Do we need to talk something through? And maybe if it's the first time for that person, if it was a minor one, you don't even have to do this in public. First time is usually a, hey, are you okay conversation. What you will tend to find, though, if you ask a good enough questions, is people agree that if it keeps happening, then they should have an informal warning from you. And if it keeps happening, they should have a formal warning from you. And that should actually be something that we can exit somebody on if they continue to do things that impact the rest of us, because they've just said, this is not behavior that makes us feel good. They've just agreed that that's not what they want in this workplace. And now they are telling you this is what you would. And so I've never had this conversation with a team that hasn't agreed by usually third, but sometimes fourth strike, that should be a terminatable offense. Now, the best thing about this is you get to write this up as policy, and you get to send it out to them going, hey guys, just, summarizing what we all agreed. Here's the plan for if we hear these behaviors. Feel free to let me know if you're hearing them and I didn't know about them. Anybody got any concerns about it, please come talk to me. Because then remember those 3 steps. We've got the acknowledge it, and then we anchor it, and we can immediately go, hey, I just saw an eye roll there. Remember, we all agreed that that's not how we're going to treat each other. Are you okay? You've now got a guaranteed anchor. And then when you're sitting in that room, when they're deflecting and going all over the place about who else's fault it is, you've got that, yeah, I know, but we all agreed as a team that the second time we heard this, that I was going to have an informal conversation with you. So that is what I'm doing, because that's where the line is. So you've already got them kind of between a rock and a hard place that they created. So start with them, all right? If it's 1 or 2 people, all right, that's okay. You can manage this. You can be doing this yourself. But if this is a kind of cultural thing now that you've got a bit of a quagmire of incivility, I would start here, set those expectations so that when you're in the acknowledge, anchor, ask phase, you've got really clear anchors straight away. And then when you get to that follow-up conversation, you've got that line. You know what the line is that you have to hold. You don't have to win an argument because they already argued for your point that this behavior should be dealt with in this way by the 3rd time it happened. Yeah. Last but not least, quick invite, okay, is, I do have a worrying amount of experience doing some of this stuff, and a worrying amount of being recruited specifically to help people with those people who are a little bit more prone to the incivility. And how do we set that up to bring them around, bring them into understanding where our line is and being a part of this team and being a positive contributor to this team? Or how do we make them see that this isn't the right team for them? Because there are teams where some of those behavior tolerances are different. There's a really interesting case in the mine science a couple of years ago where somebody tried to take an employer to court because he was sworn at multiple times, and, it was all about, it was bullying and all of that sort of thing. And in fact, they lost because they could kind of prove as a culture that swearing at everybody was a normal part of our culture and nobody else. It was what we did around here. So there may be workplaces that are better suited to people that if you're a really experienced person and you just want to get on with your job and you want to be able to tell people how to do quickly and you don't have to add all the niceties and the pleases and the thank yous, there are workplaces like that. And you can help them see that this isn't the workplace that makes them feel like they can be their full selves if that's what they want to be. So I have what I call the that one person protocol, otherwise known as on the bus or off, whereby I can help you with some of the stuff. So the tools and the scripts, and depending on what level you want to go to, I can hold your hand all the way through. I can be your practicing in front of the mirror. I can be your, yes, you can do that. No, you definitely can't say that. Okay, this person's responded to that with an email. Let's, script a reply together. Getting, really mostly coaching you to have the confidence to know what you can and can't do legally, but also helping you with the confidence to pull it off, but really without any of the ambiguity and the fluff that we sometimes get from our HR teams, which is like, oh, well, we should, do these things and tick all these boxes. Now, we want to tick all the boxes. We want to make sure we're always being legal, we're always being respectful, we're always being compassionate. But sometimes if we get too stuck in those things, we never take action, and then we're not being compassionate or respectful for the rest of our team. So if you need help in that space, all right, the first 5 people that get in touch with this promo code, you can have 50% off. Just because. Thanks for coming. I did have 222 people registered for this, so clearly there is a need. Please feel free. I want you to go away. I don't want you to approach me this afternoon unless you're really, really desperate. I want you to go away and try this stuff first. I don't want you to just be like, oh yeah, cool, I need help. Hopefully I've given you a little bit of confidence and ideas today to go away and try this stuff. And if you don't find that you're getting the traction that you need, then that's where you're very welcome to get in touch. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. I realize that for a lot of people, you may not feel comfortable asking direct questions in front of a group of people, and that is totally okay. You are very welcome to. If you've got a question that you want to ask, I'm very happy to help you with specific challenges. If other people want to drop off and don't want to hear the answers to those, then a couple of smaller group may stay around and ask questions. That's totally okay. For everybody else, thank you so much for coming. I have really appreciated how many people need help in this space and are reaching out for it. And please know you are not alone. There are people who can help you. And if nothing else, don't forget, just say something. Yes? Cool. No problem at all, Katie. If anybody does have any questions or any how do I or specific challenges that they want to know how we could deal with. No, nobody's feeling quite brave enough to throw their team under the bus in public. That's totally okay. Feel free to reach out, guys. You know where I am. You've got my contact details now. I can always help. Okay, cool. Looks like people are starting to drop off. Was an absolute pleasure. I will hopefully see you all around sometime soon.